everyone. Welcome to our special live edition of Spilling the Tea on GovCon. I'm Teresa Moon, Director of Market Strategy for Parabilis. We are the preeminent partnership for government contractors, providing holistic support that includes a line of credit to fund your growth. The purpose of this podcast is to assist small businesses with success in the federal marketplace by introducing them to industry experts and resources that they may not otherwise know about. Today, we welcome Evan Henris, Vice President of Risk and Compliance for Parabilis. I've worked with Evan for the last 5 years, and he is a true leader in the office and outside in our industry, both for his expertise and his consummate pursuit of knowledge and understanding of the business aspect of federal contracting. Today, we will unpack what is on everyone's minds regarding navigating the government shutdown from a business planning perspective, understanding the history of how the industry has endured through past shutdowns, and some practical practices that should be employed so that you don't fall victim to the same mistakes twice. I'm so proud to have him with us today and highlight to all of you one of the brightest minds I've had the privilege to learn from. I'm also very proud to call him my friend, but I don't want to gush too much and make him blush. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Evan.
Hey, Teresa. Hey, everybody. Thank you for the awesome introduction. Yeah, just briefly, a little bit about me. I joined Parabilis back in, 2018, before we were really Parabilis. I think I was number 4 or 5 and fell in love with the mission right away. Really got close with our CEO at the time as we understood his vision for building this company out. And I really had the fortune of working through all the ranks, all the different departments here in finance, in credit, in advisory, and investor management. And now my role in credit and risk is a little bit more strategic, a little bit more long-term focused. And yeah, here we are talking about what I hope I was going to wake up to good news about. The shutdown would have ended by now, and this would be a better discussion, but didn't get that. So, no end in sight, it looks like.
Yeah, it's unfortunate with that. But good news is we have lots of resources that we can offer to our listenership so that they can follow through with the commitments that they already have to their businesses. And, you bring a unique perspective for our work, what we do, because, to go back even a few years prior to you being with Parabilis, you were a business owner. You've started businesses, you've started charitable organizations. Talk a little bit about that as a business owner, because I think that's a focal point that not a lot of lenders have, are not just the aspect of financing expertise, but really knowing how to run a business yourself.
Yeah. So I was going to caveat this conversation with, all of this advice is easier said than done. And I'm very aware of that, right? And a lot of the advice is going to be more, how do we prepare for this next time? Because we're a little too late, as I'm a realistic person here, on day 17, going into day probably 20 of the shutdown. But yeah, I understand what it's like. I understand the pressure, but I also understand, the risks we take on as small business owners and small business operators. So part of that is just navigating the challenge of what now seems to be the new normal, which is unfortunately probably going to be more frequent shutdown occurrences, which we'll definitely touch on.
Absolutely. And with reference to that, we're fortunate that you're not only, great in the working with our clients, but you're a very prolific writer as well. And you've published a lot in the past for us. And recently, we had an article published by you titled "Washington Shuts Down, Small Business Foots the Bill." And this article was intended to rally the small business community in federal contracting in a practical approach to acknowledge the gaps in policy to practice and move toward a proactive approach to stimulate change that can better the outcome small businesses bear when Capitol Hill grinds to a halt. So everyone that's on live with us right now, or those that are listening later on, grab pen and paper and get ready for some great information that I promise you won't be hearing anywhere else. So we'll jump right into your article. In that, you are quoted saying, "Every time Washington grinds to a halt, the same line gets repeated. Essential work continues and small businesses will still be paid." It sounds reassuring on television, but it's not true. Can you explain what you meant by that statement?
Yes. So wanted to get the article out quickly, and I wanted it to read like an open letter to anyone who's willing to listen in policy and government and in politics, because I think we as a small business community need to be noisy here because there's what's supposed to happen, right? There's what's said, and then there's what actually happens and what's done. And I don't think it's well understood that what's happening isn't what's said, right? The policy is small businesses are paid and paid promptly for work completed, even in a shutdown. And essential work continues in a shutdown. And contractors continue working and are expected often to continue working. But me and the team here at Parabilis, we have a unique position to be able to watch what actually happens. And we saw, a massive slowdown in payments almost overnight when the shutdown began, like 60, 70% less coming in than normal. And that didn't make sense because this is billed approved invoices that should come through because the work was done prior to the start of the shutdown and the invoices had been sitting. So it's actually just an operational problem that I don't know if everybody is aware of because everyone thinks small businesses are being paid. Everyone says small businesses are being paid. The policy's in support of this, but what we're seeing on the ground is just it's not happening at the rate it was and the rate it needs to be compliant with the Prompt Payment Act to keep small businesses afloat, right? And frankly, I don't want to say this is an unprecedented time, but it is certainly uncommon enough to say, like, nobody really knows what's going to happen because looking at the history of shutdowns, it's fascinating. So the Anti-Deficiency Act gets passed into law in the late 1800s because agencies kept spending more than was appropriated, and that was obviously not going to work. So they put it on paper, that can't happen. And basically for 100 years, everybody just does that. And then in the late 70s, Jimmy Carter was president. They kind of got away from that a little bit, and his attorney general at the time reinterpreted the ADA, and that modern interpretation is what we kind of base shutdowns on today. And since then, so since the 78 shutdown under Carter over the aircraft carrier spurred the reinterpretation of the ADA, we've only had 3 shutdowns go beyond 2 weeks. This is the 4th. So a lot of those were many years ago, right? This was 95 under Clinton, 2013 under Obama, of course, and then 18 under Trump's first term. So those were spaced far apart enough that a lot of people in government might have not been that are there today, might have not been there then. So how do we handle Prompt Payment Act versus Anti-Deficiency Act in compliance with those two parts? Ironically, they're right next to each other in the FAR, separated by the Assignment of Claims Act. And that is what we're kind of seeing clash, right? Because contracting officers, anecdotally, I'm seeing are being told by their clients that they're not getting paid. And then they're going, well, it's approved. Let me check. Let me look into it. It must be the shutdown. And then I think what's happening is maybe there's just empty cubicles at DFAS and nobody's there to push the button. And if it's as simple as that, I think we as a small business community and us as a small business lender and small business advocacy group need to do our part to make it known that's happening because that's an easy fix.
I mean, not only that it's happening, but it's unacceptable, right? Because
Yeah.
this isn't like people are demanding payment for future work. This is demanding or needing payment for things that have already been completed. And so, while we were prepping for this conversation, we talked through this that while the people who are in charge of this, if you will, in government may be well intended in the sense of you can stand behind the fact that we're going to make sure that small businesses and essential work is still continuing on and being paid for. But it isn't put into practice because there haven't been safeguards that have been pulled all the way through so that actually happens. And so while they can stand and say that this is the intention behind the way things are going, it isn't in actuality happening. And you talked a lot about how when you were doing your research to prepare for putting the article together, that you saw a good opportunity for small businesses to stand firm on what is and isn't happening right now. There are a lot of small businesses, small contractors who are listening today that weren't in business in 2018 or weren't in business in 2013. And so the going through of an actual shutdown itself has never been experienced. And so mistakes are going to be made by everyone across the board regardless. But if we can anticipate from based off of research that you've done as well, that this may be a trend because of things that are actionable right now that we're seeing, if this could potentially be a trend that is utilized on the political landscape, that we need to make sure that small business leaders are getting involved at the state, local, federal level and engaging the lawmakers so that there is a resounding voice behind it. And so, really, your article was a rally cry for people to recognize what they might not actually know to be true because they haven't engaged in the marketplace for long enough, correct?
Yeah, and don't assume that, you know, it's happening for a reason. I don't think it's known widely that this is happening, and I think we need to be loud about it, right? And I think you're absolutely right. I've been concerned about the obvious political division in the country and how that's going to drive probably a increase in shutdowns over the next 20, 30 years. So if I'm a small business contractor today, I'm looking at ways to, and we can talk about this, build resiliency into my business model to anticipate it and expect it. Obviously, hope for the best, plan for the worst. If it doesn't happen for another 7 years, great. But I'm expecting it to happen every year. And I have a response plan already ready to put into place and just execute when it does happen so that there's no panic and there's no confusion.
I mean, small businesses are known for being agile and able to pivot as it pertains to access and development of technologies, if you will. But they also are agile in the way of being able to maneuver when things shift on a financial landscape for this purpose. But we talk about it a lot internal with our clients and our prospective clients, on the financial side of things with preparation and a business plan, including plan A, plan B, plan C, so that you're not caught with your proverbial pants down when things go differently than you had anticipated. Because if you've got a, Pollyanna approach to your business practices, you're going to be let down. And so this is a clear indication that if this could even be a trend, every 5 years, it's still worthy of recognition now to start planning for
Yeah.
the next one immediately. And you've already talked about a slowdown in payments that you're seeing internally, but let's dig a little bit deeper in some other things that you've been seeing on the financial sides for small businesses since the shutdown began, because working intimately with our clients, you've seen some things that shifted rather quickly, and our pendulum is swinging back and forth right now.
Yes. We touched on it a little bit with the earlier question, but the biggest thing we're seeing is the slowdown in payments. And anytime you slow the transition or the changing of hands of money in an economy, it just grinds everything to a halt and causes a lot of ripple effects, negative ripple effects. But us in the GovCon community being so close to the kind of nucleus of this problem, we're the first to get the brunt of this. And a lot of small business owners don't want to pass that brunt on to their second, third, and fourth tier subs and partners. But the silver lining here is it's not the small business GovCon's fault, right? They have a fundamentally stable business that hasn't changed. It's just in an environment that's changed. And they now may or may not have the resiliency built in that a larger company would,
Mhm.
right? A small business, realistically, let's say a services company doing 1 million a month in revenue, making 30 points, is told to prepare for a 60-day shutdown, every other year. Okay. But the best way to do that is to have 2 months of payroll in cash saved, but that's just simply not realistic. You can't have, so it's $700,000 a month of direct payroll for your cost of goods to generate your revenue. So 60 days would be $1.4 million. That small business is lucky if they're netting 10 points. And how long would it take to save 1.4 million in cash, not to mention the expense of holding that much cash just because the government might decide to do this to you? It's not a realistic solution. So they're left with more creative opportunities for how to deal with this, how to navigate it, which we'll get into later. But I do want to say what we're seeing is not necessarily binary. Like it's not everybody's not being paid at all. It's some payments are coming in and some aren't. And then some are delayed and some are on time. So I don't know why that is, but it might just be the nature of who's furloughed and who's not at the payment processors. I don't think it's by direction to not pay things. I think it's simply a fact of navigating how the shutdown actually plays out in reality.
Well, I
So,
I
of
think the
course,
infrastructure of that probably could be a part of the problem because, for instance, we're under the midst of all of this going through a far overhaul,
yeah,
and this is the first time in 50 or 60 years. So it's not like the government moves very fast in making changes when they see an issue. So if the issue is how in the heck are we supposed to continue business as usual, even from the essential standpoint, when internal receiving parties on the government side are furloughed? So it makes it impossible. I mean, it just sounds like, a cascade of catastrophe when you look at it in terms of how can anything continue to go. I mean, anyone that's gotten on an airplane in the last couple of weeks knows what the likelihood of their not being on time is, because there's essential workers that aren't even there, and that's on the essential side. So I think this is a highlight for me personally, being engaged in our industry in this way for the first time during a shutdown. I'm seeing a whole lot of red flags that need to be called into question and fast tracked, I would think, in terms of people really, not necessarily getting upset about it and it forcing action, but people recognizing that if there is a problem, the only way to solve it is to become a part of the solution, or you're just negating the fact that you're actually involved in and seeing a downside of it with your business. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like common sense in terms of recognize a problem. First step is to, address it and look for the change. And I think that what you see internally for us is, the slow trickle in of payments that are coming through irregularly, and the way that we can advise based off of those types of practices, how things can go. And I think you know, we know from our experience in lending that, there is an issue when cash flow starts to slow down in terms of what's coming in and what's going out. We need to start making some adjustments. And you talk about being agile, right? We got to go and make those pivots pretty quickly. And so, in preparation for this, we did talk about some smart steps, and you've got a 3-point plan, I believe, of things that people can keep in mind when building their business plan, to include steps to take with their vendors and with landlords or their lending partner during that payment gap. You already know it's happening right now. You're aware of it. So what are some practical steps that
Yeah.
people can address now?
Well, first, to your point on that agility, it's such a strength of small business. It's why we need to protect our small businesses in this country. And not paying them is not protecting them. But
Right.
that agility and that innovation that lives at the small business level is what makes America and our contracting base so powerful, because we can respond and develop technologies very quickly, because we have these small businesses with these small teams that are incentivized, and this just disincentivizes it. It disincentivizes people to work with the federal government. And we'll get into strategies next, but I think we really need to be noisy about this, because we have to protect the small business class that serves this government. There's 55,000 of them operating. And if we're seeing in our portfolio a 70% slowdown in repayments, and that's just a small portion of the entire country's small business community, I can only imagine what the real numbers are. And I don't think that's being studied. But anyway, I digress. Yeah. So what do you do? Right. I mean, first and foremost, don't panic, stay calm. Panicking and not staying calm result in making bad decisions, like letting cash leave your company that should have gone somewhere else. So the first thing we want to do immediately is pause any opportunistic spending. And I mean pause by, like, meet with your team and we're stopping everything that's not essential. Even if we're at the beginning of the shutdown, hypothetically, in this model, we don't know if it's going to be 30 days or 4 days. On average, they're 7 days. But again, we're in an unprecedented time. So I'm assuming it's going to go 60 days as a small business owner. And I need to plan around that. And I hope it's going to be less. I need to stop any non essential travel, any non essential conferences, any non essential expenditures that will add to the problem. Because what that will do, if we continue business as usual while triaging expenses that are due today, it's going to create a balloon of payments due when this all ends that is
Mhm.
only going to ripple out and be difficult to navigate. So I'm going to cut back on anything non essential, push everything off. I'm not talking about like letting people go. I'm talking about like, hey, don't go to happy hours, don't go to conferences, don't do anything that isn't absolutely necessary to the operations of the company for 60 days. I'm doing that first. Then I'm getting clear on my numbers before I allow any money to leave the company. Because what can happen is things are set up automatically all the time, right? Automatic ACH debits will hit, we'll pay things, we'll pay people. And that's great in an ordinary environment because you stay on time, but now you need to preserve cash. So I'm looking at a list of everything that's due to be paid and everything that's due to come in. And I need to understand when is it coming in and when is it due, and the relationships with those vendors and what they are is going to be very important because typically the business owner, the CEO, or the executive team is going to have a better understanding about what is the art of the possible with triaging these things here. And here we like to use the three bucket method for everything, right? So you have critical, important, and good. So
Mhm.
I'm trying to work with my team to figure out what's in that critical bucket for the next 60 days. It just depends on the type of business. It can be direct payroll plus payroll related costs like fringe healthcare, 401k, and payroll taxes, of course. But some businesses will have essential vendors and some businesses will have essential contractors and 1099s. It's just going to depend. But start with the exercise of what's in that critical bucket so you know off the top of your head how much it costs your business to survive 60 days on critical expenses only. And then I'm working from there to start basically communicating with everyone that I will eventually pay. Because I think what I see a lot is small business owners taking this problem, internalizing it, saying everything's fine, everything's okay, everything's normal, business as usual, and then going in a dark room and trying to solve it on their own. And the problem with that is if you don't communicate with your vendors, your lenders, your landlord, your employees, they're not going to know where your head's at and they might not feel that you view them as important. But you can go to them and say, look, we've worked together for so many years, always paid on time. I'm in a bit of a bind right now due to the government shutdown. And I start negotiating, right? This is what I call the structured triage phase as a business owner, where we're prioritizing, deferring, freezing, and negotiating. Prioritize my expenses. I'm now seeing what I can defer. Who can I partial pay? Who can I push? Who's on, which contractors are boots on the ground now that need to be paid to execute against current work, which can wait. That's my deferral exercise that I'm hopefully doing with my finance team. And then I'm freezing, like I said, non essential expenditures going forward. And then I'm negotiating, ideally with my longer term creditors, like my landlord, my lender, my lenders in some cases, because I can speak specifically to lending last. But I mean, landlords can typically wait. I don't know the situation of every business, but odds are you're not going to get evicted overnight. So especially in a government shutdown, you're looking for options. You're asking them for options preemptively to avoid a missed payment
Mhm.
or, not communicating about a missed payment and then triggering all these automated things that happen when you miss a payment, right? Automatic default notices, automatic collections efforts, automatic default, if not forbearance. Especially with a lender, I mean, we're in the business of waiting. So, look, if you're transparent with us, transparency earns flexibility, I always say. So, be transparent, talk to us about the problem, especially a lender that works in the federal space is going to understand and want to work with you to defer things, to be flexible, see if you can get your payment moved to the end of the month, see if you can get on a payment plan, depends on the type of loan. But again, communication and transparency goes a long way. And with your lender, always bring data, right? You want to basically show them what your business has done to date, what the future holds. We'll talk about what's coming after the shutdown too, as well, because that is all helpful narrative for the lender to make the right moves for you in anticipation of missing a payment, as opposed to missing the payment and then triggering a whole slew of bad things that could have been avoided.
Mhm. I love that you've touched on transparency being key and leaning on the relationships that you build as a business owner, and I think that's super important, especially in the small business environment. The owner tends to take on the biggest burden, and while we always encourage on this show and internal to Parabilis of building your team of resources internal to you that are experts in those own departments, and so rather than you as the business owner taking on everything that by yourself, you've purposely built your team with experts that can help. So you've got either an accountant that's fractionally helping you so that you can line out what is, critical today and important and things that you can put on hold essentially and line iteming those types of things. But the relationships also that you build with the people who are helping you build your business is it's so key in that. And I think all too often we tend to steer away just as humans in general of that vulnerability aspect of it. And in preparation for this, you talked a lot about that business owners engaging with the federal market right now are not at fault for the state that they're in right now.
Yeah.
They didn't go, I think you even made reference to, they didn't go to the casino and gamble the money away. The money has come to a halt because the federal government is shut down and bills aren't getting paid. And this is something, that we rely on wholeheartedly, as, the government always pays their bills. So I think that there's a lot to be said with the sense of being upfront and honest and reaching out to those parties early and often so that they know where you stand. Better to be oversharing than undersharing because, to your point, if you neglect something like a vendor payment, for instance, or a payment to a loan, and these people don't know what the actual circumstance is that's preventing you from being able to do these things, something
Yeah.
like a lien against your business is going to have a very long-term effect. I mean, I think about it just from a, personal standpoint. You go rack up credit card debt, your credit score is gonna fall, and in a lot of circumstances, that makes it difficult or impossible
Yeah.
to obtain new credit. So it's just, practical practices that make really good business sense now more than ever of being upfront and honest about what you're dealing with.
Yeah. Lenders, big and small alike, have a lot of levers they can pull on their end to accommodate this kind of problem. When it gets difficult to accommodate is when there's a fundamental credit risk change in the business itself without advanced communication, right? You fundamentally changed your business model and the lender didn't understand that. So in this case, you didn't do that. The government is just, you know, there's an empty cubicle at DFAS and you're going to pay them as soon as that guy comes back to work. It's as simple as that. And the lender's going to work with you. Ideally, at least 50% of the time, you're going to find success with this with lenders, vendors, and landlords. And that could solve half your problem. But when it comes to how do we build this into our business model for the long term, I mean, like I said, I'm assuming it happens every year or two for 60 days, which is worst case scenario. It's probably not going to be that way, but let's just say that. How can I design my company to survive that and thrive through it and not lose my entire team every time it happens? I think there's a lot we can do as small business owners, but there's also a learning curve for the rest of the economy that supports small federal contractors and understanding what it means to work with a federal contractor in this new shutdown environment and understanding the flexibility that they deserve because of that. I think the general business community has to get used to that. But until then, I'm figuring out how to build my revenue pipeline, my backlog, to have enough commercial revenue uncorrelated to the federal market so that I can cash flow myself, just cash flow, not enough profit to float the business, but just enough cash coming in from a commercial source that's different from the federal, separate from the federal issues so that I can survive the federal side for 60 days. And that's just a reverse engineering exercise of my business financials to say, how much does it cost? $500,000 for 60 days. Then I need to have $500,000 of cash flow for 60 days. So $250,000 a month in commercial work, spitting off $250,000 in cash flow. That sounds reasonable. As a small business with $1 million a month already in
Mhm.
federal work, I can go do that. And then that way, it's just more top line for you, more margin, and it's good work anyway. I'm hoping, but it's also an insurance policy. So when the government shuts down, I don't have all my eggs in one basket, right? So as a business owner, that's probably what I do first to prepare.
I think that's great because in good times, we talk about diversification. We talk all the time about how, it's exciting when you have a relationship with someone at a government agency and that relationship is,
Yeah,
fueling some of your biggest opportunities. And in a lot of time, most recently especially, we've seen a lot of movement from agency to agency or people retiring and new people stepping in. And so if you've got all your eggs in one agency and that relationship that's been the catalyst for a lot of the opportunity that's come to you goes away in some aspect, then you kind of pigeonholed yourself because what we usually see historically is that, going after an opportunity is 12 to 18, even 24 months out
yeah,
because of how opportunity drops in our industry. And so same thing goes when it comes to, building that type of plan for relationship on the commercial side. If you're not diversified on both sides, then when you have a lapse in even in good times, contract opportunities, right? Your pipeline runs thin. If you don't have anything to subsidize for the potential growth, then you're at a deficit regardless. And so that I think that's great information now for businesses who may have come
Yeah.
from the commercial sector. They understand that a little bit better because that has been what's subsidized their ability to grow and how, it typically takes 3 to 5 years for a government contractor to see consistent growth. Commercial business and commercial opportunities run a lot differently than that, and so they come into the market with an understanding of that is gonna be the support that takes them through, but those that have come, say, we see it a lot, someone who's got a proficiency within a large prime, and they say, "Hey, I know I can take this and build my own company because I'm really great at what I do," but they
Yeah.
don't have any past performance at all, they dive straight in with their relationships into the federal marketplace, and then they don't have anything to hold them up in times like this. So diversification works both ways, both internal to the government and making sure that you're spreading it across multiple agencies, but
Yeah.
also being able to maintain on the commercial side.
It is generally good advice to diversify no matter what the problem, but it just depends where your business was hardest hit during the shutdown, right?
Mhm.
If it was lost opportunities, right, that you had a lot in the pipeline that you thought would hit right at the start of the fiscal year and it didn't, there isn't a ton of ways to avoid that problem. I mean, the shutdown is going to stop opportunities. That's really unfortunate, but luckily they're just delayed, right? We're looking at $400 billion. It's about in appropriations. It's about to start converting into contracts for 26 and 27. Much of it through existing contract vehicles that are already awarded. So I'm expecting the opposite problem in a couple months to start seeing contracts come out like crazy. But yeah, I mean, I'm diversifying my backlog not if any other reason, just because it's good business, but also designing it so that I can survive a shutdown for 60 days without losing essential expenses, right? Everything in that critical bucket is needs to
Mhm.
be by the cash flow.
Right. It's also acknowledging where the budget is actually pouring into. I think it's one thing to know where your proficiencies meet mission based off of agency and acquisition practices, right? I do X, Y, and Z, and these agencies tend to buy more frequently of this. But it's also, are those agency programs going to be budgeted in this calendar year? Or is this something that might get pushed based off of others on the agenda that are in priority? So you not only have to be budgeting for what's going on in your own business practices, but you have to budget for the fact that the budget coming out of Washington is gonna go into certain areas that you may not have anticipated, so having relationships there and following that, the money going all the way through is super important as well. I don't think people take it for granted, I just don't think that they necessarily know what that means and how it'll affect them.
Exactly. Don't aim for perfection. Just how could you have made this less painful? And I'm assuming as well as these shutdowns, let's say they do increase in frequency and they stick around the 2 week mark, let's say the average duration increases. The government's also going to get better at this because they're frankly out of practice. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of new people that weren't working in the federal government last time this happened. And frankly,
Mhm,
there's a lot less people working in the federal government in general due to other goings on. So
mhm,
there's generally a kind of mix of the perfect storm, if you will. But now I'm saying, okay, I just got to build my business around this. I just got to change my model so that I'm protected
mm,
from whatever it was that hit me hardest, whether it's stop work orders that came on my contracts because they're considered non essential, whether it's cash flow crunch because of the payment delays that inevitably occurred, or whether it's lost opportunities or delayed opportunities because of the unappropriated funds that were
mhm.
sitting in the budget that are about to hit, which also creates a cash flow problem, right? Because typically these contracts solve a problem when they hit, right? They generate cash and they solve potentially the investment that you put into those contracts might be on a loan, it might be personally leveraged and that needs to get paid back. So now you're paying more interest. But yeah, in general, it's all bad, but you can get creative as a business owner for how to prepare for it next time.
Right, and I think you've queued up my last question for you in a great way as well. So, once we make it through to the other side of this, how can business owners rebuild? You've touched on it a bit, but how can
Yeah.
they rebuild and prepare for future shutdowns?
I am getting with the senior team at the company and putting together a response plan for a 60-day shutdown that goes through what I detailed earlier, the structured triage, prioritize, defer, freeze, and negotiate. I know already what's in my critical bucket. As my business grows, I'm going back to that critical bucket probably quarterly and checking if it's adequate. And I know that number in my head so that if it hits and when it hits, I already know, boom, execute the plan. The team pulls it out. They know what to do. It's not a frantic panic attack. It's just a simple exercise and execution of the plan that you built with your senior team. I'm hopefully diversified in revenue by now, and I can have cash flow coming in the event that I don't get paid as quickly. I hopefully have some available credit in place that I can lean on because as a small business, all my liquidity, aka all my cash, is tied up in receivables. So I need to somehow liquidate that regularly in an affordable way. And last resort, I'm figuring out how, as a business owner, I took on this risk. I'm going to be thinking about how I could leverage my personal assets in a safe way to float the business. If it comes to it, I'm loaning maybe capital to the business at the same interest rate that I'm borrowing it, potentially against my home equity, potentially against my stock portfolio, whatever it may be. It's a personal decision. But as a business owner, the cost of not doing that is often far outweighs the cost of doing it, right? The 9 or 10 points it costs to pull money out of a home versus the cost of losing your core team or your contracts. I think
Mhm.
that's a good decision.
I mean, I think the core team aspect of it, finding, w high level skilled workers to perform at the highest level on the awards that you're winning is key, especially in an economy the way that we see it now. There's a lot of people looking for work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna find the best people. So if you found them, keeping them is essential. It's critical. They once the floodgates open back up, that they can be there to support that, and I think that's a great point to make. I think there are so many proactive ways to look at it in a positive perspective that, maybe having to and structuring it, like you said, as a loan back to your business. We've talked about it internally, and our CEO, Bruce Lyman, has said in the past about how he's counseled with business owners who don't lend money to their company and have that money lent back or paid back, and
Yeah.
it's such a misstep because how do you ever rebuild that? I mean, it's one thing to front it because it is your baby, it is your business, and so being the one that helps get it through to the other side of a tough spot is great,
You got to
but
protect yourself. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Lots of people with more expertise than me on how to perfectly do that. But in general, look out for yourself and your interests because at the end of the day, your business exists to support you and your staff as well as execute your mission. So make sure that you're not putting yourself in last place to navigate this challenge.
Mhm. And I think that's a great point that you made as well, that, you've gotta protect yourself, and the way to do that is by having experts that can assist you. Are we have an ecosystem at Parabilis of service providers and experts all across the board in different proficiencies that are supporting services for federal contractors to help build those business plans, help with the accounting purposes, help with the, financial aspect of utilizing maybe your own personal finances to usher through a time like this. And so, we are a great resource for not only the information like someone like Evan as an expert can lend in terms of really painting a broad picture of what the environment looks like for us and how to find a pathway out of it, but providing you with introductions to partners of ours who support not only our clients, but other business owners that we know within the industry that rely on resources to help guide them through the aspects of their business that they might not necessarily be an expert at. And that's super important too. Then now is not the time to start cutting corners with engaging with, educational resources that can not only teach you about things like this, but actually do it for you so that it's done properly. So you can not only get to the other side of it, but then continue to thrive afterwards.
Yeah. Communicate early and often was one of my main pieces of advice. And that
Mhm.
includes asking for help as a business owner and not carrying all that weight on your shoulders alone and trying to solve the problem or pretend like there isn't a problem and carry that burden because that's just going to make you stressed and make poor decisions. And that's not good for the business.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the best way that we can end this is that, we all are in this together. Everyone's experiencing different pain points, but it's all, going on at the same time. There's a lot of people that you can reach out to that can maybe a little bit further ahead of you that have dealt with this before that can be, great people to ask advice from. And we pride ourselves at Parabilis for being a nexus of resources in terms of being able to connect you with what you need today. And so, with that being said, you don't need to do it alone. You can reach out. People are here to help you. We service the federal marketplace in every way that we can through expertise of the whole process itself. But it is a relationship business. And so
Cool.
there are relationships we can share. Each of us internal not only has our own network, but we combine that all together and we talk constantly about where we can share and help people. So definitely want to reach out. And we've reached the end of our allotted time, and I was really excited to have you on. We don't typically, promote internally, but I'm glad that we started with you, Evan. You were a fantastic guest. I can't thank you enough for being as prepared and definitely providing timely information as we're rolling through. This is not something that other people are talking about right now, and I,
No.
I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but we as a team pride ourselves on being out front and being transparent in our own environment, and you lead us in a really wonderful way with, really being educated on where we are in the state of things in our industry and how we can be help. And so I really appreciate you spending time with me today.
Yeah, thank you. This was awesome. I appreciate it. And again, if anyone needs help or wants to talk further about specifics, please reach out to me. I'm sure that my information is here on the screen.
It
So
is.
look forward
Yep.
to hearing from you. I appreciate
Awesome.
it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let not your hearts be troubled, my friends. If you send us your questions through the comment section of today's live broadcast, we'll be sure to reach out to you and provide some insight where applicable. You can also go to our website, parabilis.com, and reach out at information at Parabilis, and we can reach back out to you personally as well and have one off conversations. We're here to help. We pride ourselves on staying in tune to your needs in an ever changing environment and use our ecosystem of experts, internal and external, to our team to address your concerns. So, once we've got a better understanding of when we'll make it through to the other side of this, I'm hoping that Evan will consider scheduling part two of this discussion if demand requires it, which I'm pretty sure it probably will. I'm super proud to work alongside you, Evan, and I trust your take because you truly aim to assist and serve the government contracting community. So thank you very much again for your time and expertise. And thank all of you for joining us. As always, we pride ourselves on sharing the most insightful and exciting people and information to help you better navigate your GovCon journey. If you like what you heard today, you can see all of our past podcasts, which are archived on our Parabilis YouTube channel. Stay tuned for all of our future guests in the coming months as we help you grow to great heights in the year ahead. I'm Teresa Moon, and this is Spilling the Tea on GovCon. Have a great day, my friends.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Evan.